My name is Murray, and you're watching 3Bar videos. So this video is going to be about me installing this optic onto the receiver of my Type 81 SA. But before I get into that, I'm just going to quickly defend myself against all you purists out there that I know are going to be watching this video and commenting on how ridiculous it is that I've put this optic on my Type 81. I know there's going to be things said like, well, this rifle isn't a sniper rifle, why are you putting a huge scope on it? And don't you know that this is going to destroy its collectability and value down the road? And pretty much what I gotta say to all of that is, you're 100% correct. This rifle is not a sniper rifle, and all these modifications that I'm doing to it that are permanent are definitely going to damage its value down the road. However, that being said, it's not going to damage this rifle's value because I have zero intentions on ever selling it. So there is no down the road value for this gun, for it will always be a part of my collection. And that being said, adding modifications like what I intend to do in the future for this gun and this optic greatly increases this firearm's shootability and my personal enjoyment of it in a major way. So these mods, in the time being that I own this firearm, are well worth any depreciation in its value to begin with. So without further ado, we'll get into this installation video. I hope you enjoy.
So the optic system I'm going to be using for my Type 81 SA is the Russian side mount style optic system. I've been using this style of optics on many of my Comblock guns over the years and have grown to be a pretty big fan of it. So this optic system is comprised mainly of two components. First part is the side mount rail itself, which is typically bolted to the side of your firearm's receiver. And the second part is the optic itself, which tends to have an arm built into its design that reaches down over the left side of the gun's receiver, and then bolted to the bottom of that is a clamping device which attaches to the rail. I'm a huge fan of this optic system because it brings a lot of advantages to the table for these Russian styled firearms. One of these advantages being, with the turn of a simple lever, the optic can be detached and reattached in just a few seconds, maintaining zero while doing so. This is handy for a lot of situations, especially out in the field, because it allows the operator of the firearm to be able to remove the optic to get a better sight picture of the firearm's iron sights, or to allow better access to disassemble and clean the firearm. It also allows the user to remove the optic if it's damaged out in the field in a hurry. And it also gives them the advantage that they can switch out multiple optics on the same firearm as long as they're all sighted in for the firearm. Because the optic attaches to the left side of the firearm's receiver and is slightly offset to the left side of the center line of the rifle, this allows the shooter to be able to look underneath the optic while it's attached and still utilize the iron sights on the firearm, as well as disassemble the firearm while the optic is still attached. And this will also aid in the extraction of spent casings when firing, as the casings will be less likely to bounce off the shell deflector of the optic and then be redirected into the action as it closes. So for those of you that like the idea of the mounting system, but not exactly are sold on the European styled optics themselves, there is an option out there for you guys. What they are is basically a clamping mechanism, very much like the arm section of the optic, except rather than having the European optic on the top, instead what you'll get is a 1913 Picatinny rail or a Weaver style rail. So this will allow the user to be able to equip a Western styled optic to the top of the mount, and then that mount will attach to the rail just like the traditional style European side mount optics. Now I could go on for an additional half hour just regarding more information and details about this optic system, but I'm going to save that for a video in the future instead. And this video is about mounting this system onto my Type 81 SA, so I'm just going to dive right into it. The particular mounting system and optics I will be using for my Type 81 is the SVD style. The reason for this is because the SVD style has a more appropriate height design for the receiver of the Type 81, as well as all my other Russian styled firearms I own here in Canada. So by utilizing the SVD style, the height will be very nice and low, so it will offer a better cheek weld with my Type 81, as well as it will allow me to use all my optics across all my various Russian-styled firearms. They're all going to be compatible with one another. Now the SVD style mount that I'm going to be using for this project is the same mount that I have equipped to my CSA VZ58 named Vera, and I'm quite happy with this mount. I purchased this mount from westrifle.ca for a price tag of around $70, I believe, and they label it on their website as a CZ858 mount. The reason why I chose this mount is for a number of good reasons, one of which being is it's a very thick design. So this allows the holes in the mount to actually be tapped for the fasteners rather than the holes in the receiver of your firearm. This is a huge advantage for stamped steel guns like the Type 81 because the stamped steel receiver offers no material for you to thread your mount to. So this type of mount is perfect for that particular situation. Another advantage of the thick design of this mount is it allows the optic to sit further to the left than a skinnier mount, which is something that's going to be required with this particular gun because the upper portion of the receiver on the Type 81 is thicker than the lower portion. So I'm going to need that space to kind of compensate for the skinnier portion of the Type 81's receiver in order to keep the optic away from hitting the dust cover on the top of the gun. Now unfortunately, even though this mount is thick, it isn't quite thick enough for this particular situation. So as you can see down here, I have a piece of material that I'm going to use as a shim that's going to sandwich between the receiver and this mount to further move the optic to the left of the receiver. Another advantage of why I like this mount so much is because it allows the optic to be mounted a lot further forward on the receiver than most other mounts out there. It does this by having most of the bolt hole locations towards the rear of the mount, but yet the rest of the mount extends quite a ways forward from those hole locations. This allows the mount to be bolted towards the rear of your firearm's receiver, where there's generally the most available space for the fasteners inside the firearm to be located, but yet it allows your mount to be slid quite a ways forward on the receiver, which in turn allows the optic to have a better eye relief on your comblock styled firearms. Unfortunately, this mount didn't quite fit my Type 81's receiver out of the package. I had to make some modifications to it due to the particular condition of my Type 81. For those of you who have watched my initial impressions video of this firearm, you'll probably remember me mentioning that the barrel is actually bent to the right in relation to the stamped receiver on this gun. So in order for me to give the optic enough room for adjustment for that, I had to actually mill a taper to the back side of this mount in order to compensate for the bend. And of course, by doing this, that actually made the holes from the factory in the mount off perpendicular to the base after doing that. So what I had to do is I actually had to re-drill the holes in the mount to a larger size and then re-tap them to 1/4 inch by 28 thread. And that allowed the holes to be once again perpendicular to the base of the mount, which will allow the bolts, when fastened to the inside of the receiver, to seat properly against the receiver's material. While I was re-drilling those holes, I did re-drill a fresh hole at the rear of the mount, just a little ways further forward than the existing factory hole. The reason for this is the factory hole at the very back of the mount. With the particular location I'm going to put this rail on my receiver, that rear mount hole was actually going to interfere with some components inside the receiver. So I moved the rear hole location forward to an area that's a lot more spacious. So there are two additional complications that have come up with this mount while I've been playing around with how it's going to mount to the side of the receiver in my Type 81. One of them is pretty minor and the other one's pretty large. The minor one just is towards the front of the mount. It looks like it's going to make contact with one of the rivets that holds the mag release in place. To get around this, I'm simply just going to grind a little nick in the bottom edge of the mount to give it the proper clearance to get around that. It's pretty simple, but as you can suspect, the major complication towards the rear of the mount is the safety of the Type 81 SA. The particular position I want to mount this mount in places the rear portion of the mount directly where the safety is. And although I've played around with different positions that would actually allow the mount to probably mount ahead of the safety, if I were to cut enough of the the mount's rear portion off. I've decided rather to just remove the safety completely, mount the mount where I want it to be in a really good secure location, and then what I'll do down the road is I'll actually mill out a safety for this firearm that will be located on the right side of the gun rather than the left side. So that's my solution to this problem. It's totally up to you guys who are interested in doing this process as well to decide how you're going to get around the safety. It's all up to you guys, but this is how I'm going to do mine. Okay, so now that I have the mount all machined out as well as the shim plate, I got the two components pressed together with the optic clamp to them. So what I'm about to do now is the most important and crucial step of the whole scope mounting process. This is the part where I determine where I'm going to drill the bolt holes in the side of the firearm's receiver. And you want to be really careful when you do this because this is a hit or miss situation here. If you drill a hole in the wrong place, there's really nothing you can do about it. Once the hole is drilled, it's really hard to fill it back in, and you pretty much have to move the mount to a totally different position to find fresh material to drill out. So you really want to make sure when you're doing this process that you ensure that everything is in the proper place, everything is measured out right, and just double check everything like 5 times over because you really don't want to screw this up. So that being said, I'm going to show you how I do this. So as you can see, I have the scope and the mounting system all clamped to the side of my Type 81's receiver with just a simple wood clamp here. And what I've done is I've basically put the optic or clamped it to the gun and adjusted it into a position where I want it to be when it's going to be permanently affixed. So I played around with the eye relief and I've moved the scope up as far as I can to get the most comfortable eye relief. And I've also played around with the cheek weld. And now I'm satisfied with where the scope sits, so now I'm about ready to line it up to ensure that it's also pointing in relation to where the firearm's hidden. So once you got the scope in the position that you want it to be in, the next step is to, like I said, line up the optic with the point of impact for the firearm. Now the best way to do this is to make sure that before you do this, the iron sights of your Comblock styled rifle is sighted in perfectly for 100 yards because you're going to use your iron sights to determine where your scope points. So if your iron sights are out, your scope will be out as well. So if your iron sights are all good, what you want to do is put your firearm with the scope clamped to it in a really sturdy position so it doesn't move around. And then you're going to want to point it out across a distance. Preferably the further the distance, the more accurate your measurements are going to be. So once you've picked out your spot,
and you got your iron sights lined up with it, what you're going to want to do is, without bumping the firearm, you're going to want to carefully look through your scope and check to see where the reticle's pointing. So I'm happy with my windage, but now what I've noticed is my elevation is out. I'm looking at where my iron sights are pointing versus the elevation. It looks like at least at around 70 yards or so, my optic is hitting about a foot high in relation to the point of impact for the gun. So what I'm going to do before I determine where those bolt holes are going to be, I'm going to just very carefully twist the optic mount in the direction I want it to go to make the scope line up with that inaccuracy. And once it reaches that place or that point, I'm going to clamp it once again, or clamp it up tight so it doesn't move, and then at that point I'm ready to mark out the holes and start drilling. So if for some reason you're looking through your optic and the windage is way out, I wouldn't worry too much about that, because the nice thing about the windage on a setup like this is you can adjust for it really easily by just simply sandwiching a shim between the mount and the receiver of your firearm to compensate for how far it's out. It's really, in the Russian style mounts, it's really the elevation that's crucial, because the elevation is directly determined by the bolt hole location, and you really can't shim the system easily to compensate for any inaccuracy with that. These optics are also really interesting because they're our first focal plane. So you'll notice when you adjust for them, when you crank the elevation and windage knobs, you can actually watch the reticle move inside the tube. So if, say, your optic is like 8 feet out at 100 yards and you move the reticle 8 feet, what you'll get is you'll get your tube, and your image of your crosshair will literally be like off to the side of the tube. So it's not like an American optic where when you adjust for it, the reticle always looks nice. It always looks centered inside the tube. On these Eastern European style optics, when you adjust for it, it literally moves the optic in the tube. So if you're way out, it starts to look a little ugly when you look through the optic. So that's why you really want to play around with this before you drill your holes, and you want to adjust it as finely as you can, because by doing that, it will ensure that your optic looks really nice. Okay, so I have a little center punch here. I'm just using this to help me reach in these little nooks and crannies and shove the mounting bracket around, or the mounting rail. And the aluminum, this ensures that the aluminum piece and the actual mounting rail move together as one piece, rather than like pushing the mounting rail, then it moves, but not the aluminum piece. So like I mentioned earlier, my optic is out elevation wise, and what it needs to do is it needs to go down. So how I'm going to do this is I'm going to actually push the rear of the mount up nice and snug to the bottom of this contour in the Type 81's receiver. So I'm just going to push it up till the point it reaches the edge of that, because if I push it too high, what it's going to do is it's going to hit that contour, and it's going to push the mount out like this. So I'm going to get a twist in my optic. I don't want that, or a twist in my reticle. So I'm just going to push up to the right height. I'm going to mark this hole and drill it. Once I've drilled this hole, I'll be able to bolt it to the Type 81 from the inside, and that will provide a secure pivot point for the whole optic mount. And after I've done that, what I'll do is I'll adjust the optic for the elevation difference, get it precisely where I want it to be, and I'll scratch a line along the optic mount, the side rail, in the receiver, and then I'll slide the optic off and ensure that the mount hasn't moved off alignment with that line. So if the mount is still lined up with that line that I scratched, I'll go ahead and I'll mark the front hole and I'll drill it. And that should get my elevation very close. So I just did something super ghetto here. I didn't have the correct tap drill size drill bit for the 1/4 inch hole to use to mark the center of the hole. So I just took a 3/16 drill bit and just wrapped electrical tape around it to make up for the difference. Let's see if this works. So I just shove it in the hole, spin it around a bit by hand. There you go. It scratched a little mark in the middle of the hole, it looks like. Bullseye. One thing I'm really going to enjoy about drilling the hole in the side of this gun's receiver is the fact that the material is so thin that it really doesn't, it's not going to matter terribly how straight I hold the drill bit. I mean, I'm going to want to do the best I can, but it's not like you're drilling through a 1/4 inch thick receiver where if the drill's out by a few degrees, you know, you're going to notice it. Where this thin little, you know, 3mm material is nothing. It's like drilling sheet metal. Okay, I'm just about ready to do the pilot hole here. I put a little block of wood inside the receiver here, so just in case if I punch through and I don't control it very well, I won't go hitting things with a drill bit that I shouldn't be. So here we go. The point of no return. These I wonder if there's a chance these receivers are heat treated in some way, because it seems to be a really hard material. Yeah, it definitely must be heat treated. It's very promising though that the receiver's that strong. That goes to show how you know, these Type 81s might be really durable, well-made rifles. Well, that was easy. So as you can see, I got the bolt installed in the rear part of the mount. This is what it looks like inside the receiver. I got a cap screw with a washer dispersing the clamping force over a wider area. Some of you may notice that it looks like the safety spring is going to interfere with that bolt head location, and you're correct. It's something that's not an issue right now, but down the road when I go to put my safety back in, I'm going to have to trim a bunch of the excess material off that tension spring in order to have it push back down and function like a spring again, so the safety will work. But that's something I'll be able to fix very easily, so I'm not too concerned right now. So after I clamped that at the back, I of course slid the scope back onto the mount, and I made the elevation adjustment. Once I got the elevation adjusted, what I did is I clamped the optic and everything together, just like you saw the first time I did this. And then I scratched a mark in the bottom of the receiver up against the aluminum shim. And then I put a Sharpie mark on the shim and the actual steel mount. So once I unclamped it and took the optic off, I realigned everything using those two marks. And now I got her back in place, and I've clamped it really tight. And I just finished marking the hole for the second bolt location. And then you've probably also noticed that I have a wood block pressed into the receiver to do two things. One, to stop the drill bit from going too deep and damaging the inside of the receiver. The other reason is I need to drill through this plate. That it does many things, this plate. It's a part of the thing that supports the tension spring for the safety, as well as it's also the plate that holds a lot of the pins in place for the trigger group area. But I'm going to have to drill through that plate, so this wedge is going to prevent the drill bit from pushing that plate out while I drill into it. Alrighty folks, so things definitely went south fast there. Things were going really good as I was drilling through the receiver of the Type 81, but the moment I hit this little red plate behind the receiver that I had propped up with that wooden block, the drill bit just stopped cold in its tracks. It wouldn't go through that material, nor would my tungsten carbide bit on my Dremel go through it. So it's obviously this is some sort of super hardened spring material, that's you know, you're not going to have many tools that's going to drill through that. So I ended up using the abrasive cutoff wheel on my Dremel, and you can see here, it actually, interestingly enough, the abrasive cutoff wheel ate this like butter. Like, it was just effortless to cut it. But I just cut a huge swath right here to make room for the bolt and washer when I put it through the receiver. And of course it functions as normal. It captures the 2 pins right here, and it has the spring still intact, so it's all good. So moving forward, my next step is to install all of this stuff.